Hi everyone, welcome to BioXplaining. This video is a continuation of our topic pollination in plants. So let's begin. A very quick recap of what we have studied in the previous two videos. Let us see that pollination is of two types. What are they? One is self-pollination and the other is cross-pollination. Further, self-pollination can also be of two types. They are, one is autogamy, the other is geitonogamy. In case of autogamy, we have seen that the transfer of pollen occurs from the anther to the stigma within the same flower. While in case of geitonogamy, we have seen that the transfer of pollen occurs from the anther of a flower to the stigma of a different flower but within the same plant. While in case of cross-pollination, the pollen is transferred from the anther to the stigma of a different flower present on a different plant altogether, but these two plants belong to the same species, right? So, in case of geitonogamy and in case of cross-pollination, there is a requirement for some agents to help in the pollination, right? So, in case of cross-pollination and in case of geitonogamy, what do we need? Agents of pollination are required. Agents of pollination, or in simple words, we can call them to be pollinators. So in case of cross-pollination and in case of geitonogamy, agents of pollination are involved. Now let us start talking about the agents of pollination. So what do we mean by the agents of pollination? So these are certain factors that aid or help in the transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of different flowers. Now, when are they needed? Just as we have seen, they are needed in the case of geitonogamy and in the case of cross-pollination. Only in the case of autogamy, we do not require any agents of pollination. So these agents of pollination can be of two categories. One is the biotic agents, the other abiotic agents. So biotic agents refer to the living factors. Wherever you find the word bio, you'll understand it refers to life. That means living organisms. While on the other hand, abiotic means the opposite of that. So these refer to the non-living factors that are involved in pollination. So what can be the different biotic agents? Biotic agents can be small insects such as honeybees. Then we can have any kind of small animals. We can have bats. Then you should be surprised to know that even elephants can aid in pollination. So these are the different biotic agents that are involved. On the other hand, the abiotic agents are factors like wind and water. In this video, we are going to mainly focus on the biotic factors, the biotic agents, meaning the living factors. So first, let's understand pollination by insects, which is known as entomophily or sometimes also pronounced as ontomophily. So if you break this word into two parts, what you'll find is entomon means insect and phyle means affinity. So wherever you find the word phily in biology, always know that we are talking about the affinity, the liking towards something. So entomophily means liking towards insects. Say hydrophily will mean liking towards hydro, that is water, right? So there are different insects which can pollinate flowers. What are the different examples we can have? We can have honeybees, wasps, moths, butterflies, etc. And there are various flowers which are insect pollinated. Most common examples that we can come across, one is rose, then we have marigold, then we have night jasmine, etc. So these are the most common examples, but there are various other examples that are present of flowers which fall under this insect pollinated category. Okay, so what basically happens is, in this diagram, as you can see, there are two different flowers that are present, and the bee is sitting on the pollen grains of one flower. So what happens is, as the bee sits on that flower, the pollen grain gets attached to the body of that bee. So as the bee sits on the stamens, the pollens that are released from the anther sticks to the body of this bee. Now what the bee is doing, the bee is going to the next flower, right? So when the bee goes to the next flower of the same type, and what do we mean when we say same type? We refer to same species. So when the bee visits another flower of the same species, what happens? All the pollen grains which were attached to the body of this bee now gets transferred to the pistil of that other flower. That means the pollen gets stuck on the stigma of this other flower. So in this way, what happens? Both the flower and the bee, both are benefited, right? So both flower and bee are benefited. So what kind of benefit do they have? The bee gets nectar, so the bee gets its food from the flower, while the flower gets its pollination done. Now let us focus on insect pollinated flowers. What are the different characteristics that these flowers should possess? The first is they should have sticky pollen grains, and the stigma should also be sticky. Now, why do these need to be sticky? The reason is that the pollen has to be sticky so that it can well get stuck to the bodies of the pollinator. That means to the body of the bee. While the stigma needs to be sticky so that once the pollen grain from the body of the bee falls on the stigma, it should properly get stuck on it, right? So the pollens sitting on the stigma should not get displaced. The second characteristic is that the flowers should have bright colors, like they should be red, yellowish or orangish in color, so that they're easily visible to the insects and the bee gets attracted to the flower. As you can see the image here, the bee is very well attracted to the bright yellow flower that's present. The third characteristic that's present is the flowers should be able to produce nectar and they should have sweet fragrance. So this is the image of a flower that we call to be nasturtium. Okay, so this nasturtium flower, if you look into the image properly, you'll see this yellow part coming outwards. What is this? This part is what we call to be the nectary. Okay, so this nectary is that structure of a flower that produces the nectar. So when the bee comes and sits on this flower, it's getting nectar from these nectaries, and in the process, the flower is getting pollinated. And the last characteristic that we'll study is the pollen grains are produced in abundance. You know, this is a general feature for most of the cross-pollinated flowers. Why? Because we do not have 100% surety of pollination in this kind. Why? Because the insects might go to some other flower of different species. Say if we are talking about wind pollinated flowers, the wind can blow in some different direction altogether. So overall, when we consider cross pollination, there is high chance of wastage of pollen grains, right? So to make up for that loss and to increase the chances of fertilization, what does the flower do? The flower produces pollen grains in very large quantities. So let us understand insect pollination in sweet pea in great details. So before we understand how pollination actually takes place in sweet pea by insects, first of all, let's try to understand how the different floral parts of the sweet pea are arranged, right? So if you look into these diagrams present here very carefully, please note one by one. So first look into the first diagram. So what does this show? this shows you the overall image of a pea flower, specifically of a sweet pea flower. Now, carefully note this image in the middle. What do you see? You see that there are 4 petals which are present. There are 3 types of petals, total 4 petals. What are they? First one, this S here refers to the standard petal, this one. Then you have 2 wing petals which are present on the sides. And then you have K, which refers to the keel petal here. Right? So you have standard petal, the wing petals, and you have the keel petals. Well, so now that you know how the different petals are arranged in the flower of a sweet pea, let us understand how the pollination process occurs. So first, the bee comes and sits on the corolla. That is, it sits on the petals of the flower. And then it thrusts out, that means it extends its long tongue in search of nectar. Where are the nectaries present? The nectaries are usually present either at the base of the petals or at the base of the entire pistil, right? So the bee tries to put out its tongue and get the nectar from the nectary. So in this process, what happens is the wing petals and the keel petals are forced down. So for a quick recap, what did we see? This is the standard petal. Then we saw that at the sides, we have the 2 wing petals present. And at the bottom here, we have the keel petal. So when the bee comes and sits, the wing petals and the keel petals are forced down. And when these petals are forced down, then simultaneously what happens? The stamens and the stigma touch the underside of the body of this bee. Right? Are we clear with this till now? To just repeat, the bee comes, sits on the flower, it extends its tongue, tries to get the nectar. While it tries to do this, the wing petals and the keel petal at the bottom, they are all forced down. Right? So now what happens is the pollen grains which are released from the anther, they get stuck to the inner surface of the bee's body, right? So when the insect flies away, it carries these pollen grains along with it. It might go to some other flower and pollinate it, right? Alternatively, suppose this bee has already come from some other flower carrying pollens with it. Then what will happen? When the stigma gets in touch with the insect's body, these pollen grains from the bee's body will get transferred to the stigma of this flower, thus completing cross-pollination. So now, what if cross-pollination does not take place? What if this insect goes to some separate flower and the sweet pea doesn't even get pollinated? That means what if cross-pollination fails? Is there any kind of alternative which is present? Yes, there is. So if cross-pollination does not take place, there is every chance of self-pollination in this case. Can you guess why? Maybe you've guessed it right, that this flower is a bisexual flower. That means both the stamens and the carpels are enclosed within the keel petal, and both of them are more or less of the same height. That means these 2 points favor self-pollination also. That is, stamens and carpels are close to each other. They are of the same height. So, the pollens that are released from the stamen of this flower might very well go to the stigma within the same flower. That means even if cross-pollination fails by some chance, the flower has an alternative way to get into self-pollination. Well, so the next type of pollination that we'll study is pollination by birds. So this is known as ornithophily. So if you break this term into 2 parts, you have ornitho and then you have phily. So ornitho means birds and phyle or phily refers to affinity. We have just seen that. That means these are flowers which have an affinity towards birds to pollinate them. So now let us have a look into the characteristics of such flowers. First thing is that birds have a very good sense of color. They like very colorful flowers. They like yellow colored flowers, red colored flowers, but birds do not have a good sense of smell. That means if a flower has to get pollinated by birds, it should have very bright colors. It should be red, yellow, and very brightly colored. But it does not need to have sweet fragrance. So hence, birds pollinate flowers which are bright in color, but they have little fragrance. Birds usually require quite good quantity of nectar, right? So that is why flowers that are pollinated by birds produce nectar in quite great quantity as compared to flowers which are pollinated by other small insects. Okay, then for an example, we have flowers that are pollinated by hummingbirds. Their corolla, that the petals, they are very long and tubular, so that the hummingbird can come, extend its beak into the flower and take the nectar, in turn pollinate the flower. Plus the pollens are sticky and large. So there are a few flowers which are commonly pollinated by birds. For example, we can have bignonia and we can have canna. Pollination by biotic factor that we are going to know about is pollination by elephants. Does this surprise you that such a huge organism, how is it going to pollinate a flower? Well, yes, don't be surprised because that is possible. So pollination by elephants, or what we call to be Elephophily, is done to the largest flower, Rafflesia. Okay, so Rafflesia is a flower which is very large and it is found at the ground level. So what happens is these flowers are found in forests and they're at the ground level. So when the elephants are walking in the forest, they might trample these flowers even unknowingly. So when the elephant comes and stamps on this flower, what happens is the pollen gets stuck to the feet of the elephant. Now the elephant keeps walking. So knowingly or unknowingly, the elephant goes and stamps on another Rafflesia flower. So now what happens? The pollen that was stuck to the feet of the elephant now gets transferred to this next flower. So in this way, the pollen got transferred from the anther of the previous flower to the stigma of the next flower, right? So Elephophily refers to the type of pollination where unknowingly elephants transport pollen grains by trampling on one flower, carrying the pollens under their feet, and then going to the next flower and transferring the pollens to that. Okay, so now talking about the final type of pollination by a biotic factor, that is pollination by bats. We call this to be Chiropterophily. From where does this name come? So bats belong to the order Chiroptera. Okay, so since bats belong to the order Chiroptera, this kind of pollination by bats is known as Chiropterophily. Now, what are the characteristics of these Chiropterous flowers? So, Chiropterophilous flowers, they open only at or after dusk. So, this is very obvious. Why? Because bats come out only after dusk, right? So, that is why these flowers open after dusk and their anthers dehisce almost at the same time. What does this mean? This means that only at or after dusk, when the flower opens, the anthers release the pollen grains at this time, right? The flowers are large, dull colored and have very strong scent. They need not be brightly colored because at night the bats will never be able to find out how brightly colored they are. So they need to be large and they need to have very good fragrance. Then they produce abundant pollen grains. So as I just told you a few minutes back, that in case of cross-pollinated flowers, this is a common characteristic, that abundant pollen grains will be produced to make up for the loss which is very much possible, right? Examples we can have is Adansonia, Baobab, Bauhinia, Anthocephalus, and Kigelia. So this is the image of Bauhinia flower, and this is the image of a Kigelia flower. Okay, well, so we've come to the end of this topic, that is pollination by biotic agents. So do you have any doubts regarding whatever we have studied? If yes, please comment below and let me know what your doubts are. So this is all about pollination by biotic factors. In the next video, we are going to talk about the agents of pollination, abiotic, that is the non-living factors that are there. Please stay tuned to know more about the abiotic agents of pollination. If you like the video, please like, comment below, and share it with your friends, seniors, juniors. And yes, please do not forget to subscribe to my channel BioXplaining. Let's keep learning. Thank you very much and bye-bye.